They tied a noose around her neck before even asking her name. In the lawless dust of Red Hollow, justice wasn't blind. It was blindfolded and drunk on hate. They didn't want the truth. They wanted blood. And when a woman named Nara Stonefield, half-starved, half-conscious, but still standing, was dragged into the center of town, nobody cared why. She was Shoshone. That was enough. A gallows built in hours. A crowd screaming for a name to blame. Children throwing rocks. A sheriff with hands too weak to hold the law. And a preacher too scared to speak. They said she killed a white man. But there was no trial, no witness, no proof. Only a rope and rage. But then came a sound no one expected. The clink of metal against wood. A gold bar dropped at her feet by a man named Jonah Rourke. Not to buy her freedom. To buy their silence. Long enough for the truth to claw its way out. And what followed broke the town in half. Before we dive in, if you believe justice should never be decided by a mob, comment truth below, hit that subscribe button, and like this video, even if it makes you angry. No one saw it coming. When Jonah Rourke dropped that gold bar at the base of the gallows, the crowd didn't cheer. They didn't speak. They just stared, because in a place where blood was cheap, he had paid in something they all worshipped, wealth. But this wasn't about coin. This was about conscience. The sheriff looked at Jonah like he'd seen a ghost. Naira's eyes, once steeled in silent defiance, flickered for the first time, not in fear, but in disbelief. And in that moment, something ancient stirred in the hearts of the people. The terrifying realization that maybe they were wrong. Wrong to assume, wrong to hate, wrong to be silent. The silence didn't last long. Jedediah Callahan, the cattle boss and ex-soldier, spat into the dirt. You think your gold buys truth, Rourke? She's a savage. And you're just a lonely fool with a guilty conscience. Jonah didn't even blink. Then prove she's guilty, he said, or shut your damn mouth. The crowd gasped. But it wasn't the insult. It was the weight behind the words. Because Jonah wasn't just some ranch hand. He was a war veteran. A man who had lost a wife and child to a raid. One everyone blamed on her kind. But here he was, putting everything on the line to stop the very thing that took his family from him. That confused them. That angered Callahan. She killed Tom Langdon, Callahan roared. His boy saw the raiders. You going to ignore a white child's word? Jonah stepped forward. Where's the boy? The sheriff hesitated. Out on the claim, hasn't spoken since the funeral. Then he hasn't said anything, Jonah said. And yet we're ready to kill. Suddenly, a sharp voice cracked the air. I saw what happened. All heads turned. A boy, barefoot, sunburnt, with sweat-matted hair, stepped from the edge of the crowd. In his hands was a blood-stained scrap of blue cloth. My name's Caleb Langdon, he said, and she didn't kill my father. The square fell silent. A 12-year-old had just undone an entire town's justification for murder. Callahan snarled, You're confused, boy, traumatized. But Caleb stood tall. I saw the men. They were white. One had a limp. Another had a scar on his hand like a crescent moon. They weren't Apache. And she found me after. I was bleeding. I was crying. And she helped me. People began shifting, uneasy. The pastor took a step forward, then stopped. A woman pressed her hands over her mouth. One of the shopkeepers lowered his rifle. Jonah looked at them all. She helped your son, he said, nodding toward the woman now sobbing quietly. She helped your town by not letting the real murderers vanish into the dark. And yet here she stands, tied like livestock. If that doesn't make your stomach twist, then maybe you're the problem. Still, Callahan refused to bend. This is a show. It's staged. You really going to let a child rewrite the law? No, said Jonah, but I'll let him rewrite the truth. He stepped onto the gallows platform, pulled a knife from his belt, and cut the rope from Naira's wrists. This isn't justice, he said. This is cowardice wearing a badge. That's when Sheriff Griggs, drenched in sweat, finally found his voice. We'll postpone the execution. Hear her side. But it was too late for neutrality, because now the crowd had tasted doubt. And when truth walks in, lies start to rot in the sun. It wasn't the sheriff who moved first. It was an old man with a scar above his brow and a black leather bag slung over his shoulder. Doc Marin, the town's only physician and, until now, its quietest observer. "We're about to take a life," he said calmly, stepping into the heat-hazed square. "And we're relying on hearsay, not evidence. If that's justice, then we're all murderers waiting our turn." The words stung sharper than a whip. The crowd, which only moments ago thirsted for a hanging, now shifted in place like schoolchildren caught cheating. Some looked at the woman with the noose still around her neck, Nara Stonefield, and saw, for the first time, not an enemy, but a human being, but not Callahan. He doubled down, his voice rose, loud and cracked. "You really trust her? She's one of them. Her people raided our lands, burned farms, butchered our kin. You think a story from a kid and a doctor's speech clears her name?" Naira didn't flinch. Instead, she finally spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut clean through the dust and tension. "I was 50 miles from here when Tom Langdon died," she said. "My cousin Pale Willow was sick with fever. I treated her with root water and crushed willow bark. I can name every plant, every place, every hour." Doc Marin nodded slowly. "That's how you treat yellow fever," he said. And she didn't hesitate. Not once. If this is a lie, it's one better than most doctors can conjure. Still, the rope stayed tight. The noose hadn't loosened, because the real knot was in the crowd's throat. Not all could admit they were wrong, not when hate had become a habit. Then something changed. From behind the crowd, a whisper rippled, then a gasp, and then Caleb Langdon stepped forward again, trembling but determined. In his hand was a blue scrap of cloth, crusted in blood. "One of the men who killed my pa wore this," he said, voice cracking. "She didn't kill him. She saved me." Callahan stepped forward, furious, pointing at the boy. "You calling me a liar, boy?" Caleb's voice didn't waver. "No, sir. I'm calling you afraid. Of the truth." And just like that, a 12-year-old had split the town wide open, with a voice louder than any gunshot. The decision wasn't made with a speech. It was made in silence. No gavel hit. No preacher blessed it. Just a town choking on shame and too proud to say sorry. But they didn't stop Jonah Rourke when he untied Naira's wrists. They didn't protest when Caleb stood between her and the noose. And they didn't lift a finger when Doc Marin threw the rope to the dirt like it had never meant a damn thing. So when Jonah turned to Sheriff Griggs and said, "We're not done," no one argued. That same afternoon, while the dust still hung in the air like judgment, Jonah saddled up. Caleb was already waiting at the hitching post, his father's rifle strapped across his back, too large for his frame but steady in his hands. Naira came last, silent as always, but with a purpose that made even the wind shift. They left Red Hollow as the sun fell behind the canyon rim, riding into the Badlands with nothing but a child's memory, a torn piece of cloth, and a rage that had finally found direction. 3 riders, 3 names, 1 purpose. They tracked them by signs the average eye would miss: burnt matches under brush, boot prints dragging in the sand, a shattered coffee tin still warm when they found it near a dry creek bed. And for the first time, Naira spoke of more than medicine. "They limped through here," she said, crouching low near some bent grass. "One of them drags his left leg. The one with the crescent scar carries more weight in his right boot. That one's dominant." Jonah looked at her. "You read people like you read the earth." "I had to," she replied. "My people don't get second chances. We only get escape routes." That line lingered. Not just because of its truth, but because it was the first time Jonah realized she wasn't just trying to prove her innocence. She was hunting something too. Maybe justice, maybe ghosts, maybe both. By twilight, they found the camp. 3 men. A small fire. Laughing, drinking, passing a tin of beans like it was a feast. None of them had any idea they were being watched. Their rifles were nearby, but not in reach. Their guard was down. They thought they were free. "They think the town hanged me," Naira said quietly, watching from a ridge. "That's their mistake." She wanted to go in alone. Said they'd see her as a prize, not a threat. said it would buy time. Jonah hated the idea. Caleb didn't speak at all, just clutched the rifle tighter. I won't run, Naira said. I survived a noose. I'm not afraid of three cowards. So they let her go. She rode down like smoke on the wind, slow, calm, deliberate. The outlaws watched her approach with curiosity. The one with the scar tilted his head. I thought we were done with you, he said. Naira didn't answer, just raised her hands and said, I need water. They laughed. Then the fat one stood, limping, and said, You want water? You trade. What have you got? She replied, Mercy. That was the last thing they heard before the knife flashed. The man with the scar reached for his revolver, but she was faster, cut him deep across the arm. His scream cracked the canyon. Then a shot rang out from above. Jonah's rifle tore through the second man's shoulder. The third tried to run, but Caleb was already moving, boots sliding down the rocks, rifle locked in shaky hands. Stop! The boy shouted. The outlaw froze, turned, grinned with blood in his teeth. You ain't gonna shoot. I don't have to, Caleb said, but I will. He didn't blink. They tied them up with rope stolen from the camp's own bags. Found silverware, medicine tins, even a map. Circled in red ink was Red Hollow, and a list of ranches marked Next. Jonah read the names and felt his throat tighten. Some of them were people he knew. Some were people who nearly hung Naira. They planned to burn the whole valley, he muttered, and pin it on the Apache. Naira didn't react. Just sat down beside one of the captured men and said, You were going to kill a child's father. Blame me, ride on like it was nothing. The man sneered. We've done worse. Not today, she said. They rode back before dawn. Jonah led. Caleb rode in the middle. Naira came last, but with her head high. The outlaws, bruised and bloodied, were tied to their own saddles. When they reached the edge of Red Hollow, the town was awake. People stared. Some gasped. Some turned away. But no one could deny what they were seeing. The woman they tried to kill was the one who brought their justice home. Sheriff Griggs met them in the square. His hands shook when Jonah dropped the map and the list of names in front of him. You owe her more than an apology, Jonah said. Griggs nodded. I know. Naira said nothing, just reached into her satchel and pulled out the noose they had tied around her neck. She dropped it at Griggs' feet. No more of this, she said. Not for me, not for anyone. The crowd didn't cheer, didn't cry. They just stood there, finally facing their shame. And if that moment shook you, imagine what happens next. Comment "Justice" below if you're still reading. Subscribe if you believe silence can be as deadly as a bullet. And if this made your chest tighten, drop a like, because the road ahead only gets darker. They didn't speak of forgiveness on the way back. The road from the canyon to Red Hollow was long and crooked, flanked by brittle sage and the ghosts of things buried too deep to name. Jonah rode ahead, eyes fixed on the path like it could split open at any second. Caleb stayed close to the outlaw's horse, rifle still in his hands. But it was Naira who kept the real watch. Her silence wasn't peace, it was vigilance. The town emerged on the horizon like a scar. People saw them coming before they arrived. 3 riders, 3 prisoners, and a silence heavier than any funeral procession. Shopkeepers stepped out of their doors. Mothers pulled their children close. The same hands that once threw stones at Naira now clenched their hats in nervous shame. They rode straight into the square, where they almost ended her life. Sheriff Griggs waited, sweat already gathering under his collar. When Jonah tossed the stolen map and the list of targets to his feet, the old man staggered. His fingers shook as he unfolded the paper, read the names, and saw his own brother-in-law among them. They were going to burn Red Hollow, Jonah said, and the next town after. Blame it all on the Apache. No one answered, because there was nothing left to deny. Then Naira dismounted. She didn't shout, didn't accuse. She simply pulled something from her saddlebag and let it drop to the dirt. The noose they had tied around her neck. No more of this, she said. It wasn't a plea. It was a sentence. And no one objected. But not everyone could let it go. From the far end of the crowd, Jed Callahan pushed through, his face crimson, voice already raised. So that's it? We forget what they've done? What we've lost? He pointed not at the outlaws, not at the men tied to their saddles, but at Naira, like nothing had changed. My brother's dead. My farm burned. My wife can't sleep without screaming. And you let her walk in like a hero? She saved your town, Jonah said calmly. She's still one of them, Callahan spat. And what are you? Naira asked. Her voice was even, cold, terrifying in its steadiness. You watched a boy stand in front of a gallows, and you still wanted to pull the lever. You saw the truth and still clung to your rage. So tell me, what does that make you? The crowd held its breath. Callahan's face twitched. His fingers hovered near the revolver on his hip. And for one horrifying second, it looked like he might draw. But someone moved faster. A woman stepped between them, middle-aged, dressed in black, her face lined with grief deeper than any canyon. Her name was Clara DeWitt, and she had buried her son 2 years ago after a raid. Her husband lost a leg. Her name was never in the papers. Her pain never mattered. Until now. You think I don't mourn, Jed? She said softly. You think I haven't cursed the dark every night for what we've lost? I prayed for justice. But this? She pointed at the rope in the dirt. This is just another way to bury the truth. She turned to Naira, then to the boy. I saw my son in you, she whispered to Caleb. And I saw my shame in all of us. Then she did what no one else in Red Hollow had dared. She untied the outlaws herself. One by one, with trembling hands, she cut the bindings, forced them off their horses, and led them, publicly, into the jailhouse. Sheriff Griggs followed in stunned silence. For the first time in months, no one cheered, no one wept, but they all watched. When it was done, Naira looked up at the clock tower. It was noon, the exact time she was meant to die. And now, she stood free. Not because of the law, but because truth finally fought back. Jonah turned to Sheriff Griggs. There's more, he said. Names on that list. Some of them live right here, in this town, in that council. A murmur shot through the square like lightning across dry brush. Griggs paled. You sure? Jonah nodded. They didn't just try to kill Naira. They nearly destroyed Red Hollow from the inside out. A few townsfolk turned to look at each other, suspicions forming like clouds before a storm. The mayor wasn't present. Councilman Dorn had left that morning. The banker's office was locked, though it should have been open. It's not over, Naira said quietly. Justice doesn't stop because one rope falls. There are others. She turned to Caleb, who had stood silent all this time. You still want to come? She asked him. The boy nodded. I won't stop until it's finished. Jonah looked at them both. His voice was low but sure. Then we ride again. And as the sun climbed higher above Red Hollow, the gallows still stood in the square, but now empty. A reminder not of death, but of a town that almost became its own executioner. And of 3 people, once strangers, who'd now become something else entirely. They didn't rest that night. While Red Hollow slept in the uneasy quiet of a town that had nearly condemned the wrong soul, Jonah Rourke stood on his porch, hat in hand, staring out over the land like he was waiting for it to speak. Inside, the house he'd once built for a wife and child now echoed with unfamiliar but steady warmth. For the first time in years, someone else stirred the fire. Naira moved quietly through the kitchen, sleeves rolled, her blade now used not for blood, but for chopping carrots into a cast-iron pot. She worked with precision, grace, not to impress, but to survive. Her hands bore rope burns. Her eyes carried things deeper than time. But in that small kitchen, with Caleb quietly cleaning his father's rifle across the table, something old and sacred began to flicker, belonging without permission. No one said it aloud, but the truth filled every shadow in the room. They weren't strangers anymore. They were forged. Jonah set his hat down and joined them. He didn't know how to name what this was. Family wasn't the right word. It felt older than that. Harder. Built through scars and standoffs, through silence and shared fire. But outside those walls the storm hadn't passed. It was merely circling. By morning, the councilman who had been named on the outlaw's map had vanished. Mayor Coleridge's home had been abandoned, his safe cracked open, documents missing, horses gone. Banker Elwyn's ledgers showed wire transfers to names no one recognized. Money moved days before Naira's hanging. There had been plans, long ones, plans for Red Hollow to collapse from within. They weren't just going to blame the Apache, they were going to erase them. Sheriff Griggs, shaken from sleep and stripped of illusion, called for a town hall meeting. By noon, the square filled again, not for blood this time, but for reckoning. What began as murmurs had become a wave. Families once afraid to speak began whispering names, places, deals made in shadows, and then someone rode into town with a bullet wound in his side. Bo Riggs, the saloon drifter, the town drunk, the man no one had listened to. He slumped off his horse at the edge of the square, eyes wild, lips cracked with fever. "They're coming," he rasped. "Not raiders, not savages, men with badges, black coats, riders from Klamath, hired men, paid to burn it all." He collapsed before he could finish, but the message landed like thunder. Jonah turned to Naira, jaw tight. This was bigger than just Red Hollow. They had help. "Klamath's 30 miles east," she said. "If they rode last night, they'll be here by morning." The crowd panicked. Some ran to board windows. Others ran for rifles. But Jonah stayed still. "We don't run," he said. "And we don't lynch," added Clara DeWitt from the back. She stood tall, grief still etched in her face, but now flanked by other mothers, shopkeepers, ranchers. Ordinary people. People who'd once been complicit by silence. Jonah looked to Sheriff Griggs. "We need every able body, and we need to deputize fast." Griggs nodded, no longer the shaking man from days before. "I'll sign the orders, but we don't have the numbers." "We don't need numbers," Naira said. "We need conviction." That night, Red Hollow became something it had never been. United. Not by hate, but by choice. They dug trenches outside the gates, moved the livestock to higher ground. Women packed ammo, children carried water. Old Doc Marin stitched Bo's side and passed out poultices from his own dwindling stock. And Naira? She didn't sleep. She sharpened blades in the dark, chanted old words under her breath, not for magic, but memory. She tied a strip of red cloth around her wrist, the same color as the blood that had stained the boy's torn scrap. A reminder of what nearly was, and what must never be again. Caleb stood beside her as the stars blinked awake. "I'm scared," he said. "Good," she answered. "Only the foolish ride into fire without fear. But it's what you do with it that counts." By dawn, a black cloud approached from the east. Dust rising behind 20 riders in dark coats, guns slung low, eyes hidden behind tinted goggles. They didn't wear sheriff stars. They didn't need to. They were the lawless pretending to be law. The kind paid to erase entire towns and rewrite the story in someone else's handwriting. Red Hollow stood waiting. Jonah on one end of the street, rifle loaded. Naira near the water trough, knife in hand. Caleb crouched behind a crate of feed, his hands steady now. The riders slowed. One in the front raised a hand. "You've got something that don't belong to you," he called out. "No," Jonah said. "We've got someone you failed to kill." The man smirked. "Last chance. Hand her over." It was Naira who answered. "You already tried, with a rope, with lies, with men who wear masks in daylight." Then she stepped into the center of the road. "If you want to finish what you started, come and try." Behind her, the people of Red Hollow rose, rifles in windows, boots on porches, hammers and pitchforks and trembling hands willing to stand for something real. The lead rider looked around, saw no fear in the faces, only fury that had learned to stand upright. And in that moment, he understood. They hadn't saved Naira Stonefield. She had saved them, and Red Hollow would never kneel again. This story reminds us that justice isn't just a word. It's a choice made when silence is easier. Naira Stonefield was nearly killed not because she was guilty, but because fear had blinded a town. It took courage from a child, a grieving widow, and a man with nothing left to lose to expose the truth. The lesson? Justice must be earned, not assumed. And sometimes, the ones we fear are the ones who teach us how to stand. Because real change doesn't come from power. It comes from those willing to risk everything to do what's right, even when no one else will.